The Gathering Storm. Imagine a world where the fate of an entire continent hangs on the strength of a single wall. It is the summer of 1683. The air is thick with heat and the smell of wood smoke. If you were standing on the ramparts of Vienna, you would see something that looked like the end of the world. For miles and miles, the horizon is filled with hundreds of thousands of tents. You see the glint of steel. You hear the rhythmic thumping of drums and the braying of thousands of camels and horses. This is the army of the Ottoman Empire. It is the largest force seen in Europe for centuries. They haven't come to trade. They have come to conquer the Golden Apple. That was their nickname for Vienna. Today, we are telling the story of the Siege of Vienna in 1683. This wasn't just a battle between two cities. It was a clash of civilizations. It was a moment where history held its breath. If Vienna fell, the road to the heart of Europe was wide open. There was nothing else standing in the way of the Ottoman advance. The architect of ambition. At the head of this massive army was a man named Kara Mustafa Pasha. He was the Grand Vizier of the Ottoman Empire, and he was a man obsessed with legacy. He wanted to achieve what no sultan before him had done. He wanted to plant the crescent flag in the center of the Holy Roman Empire. He brought with him nearly 200,000 soldiers. They had giant cannons, expert engineers who could dig tunnels under mountains, and the elite janissaries, the most feared infantry in the world. On the other side, inside the city, you had Count Ernst Rudiger von Starhemberg. He was a hardened soldier, but he was facing a nightmare. He only had about 15,000 professional soldiers and maybe 8,000 citizen volunteers. The odds were 10 to 1. The Emperor of Austria, Leopold I, had already fled the city, leaving Starhemberg and the people of Vienna to fend for themselves. The earth starts to shake. The siege began in July. Kara Mustafa didn't want to just charge the walls. That would be too many lives lost. Instead, he wanted to starve them out or blow them up from below. This became a war of the underground. While the cannons screamed above, Ottoman sappers were digging tunnels deep beneath the city's fortifications. They would pack these tunnels with massive amounts of gunpowder to blow holes in the walls. Inside the city, the defenders were terrified. They had to sit in their basements with bowls of water or drums with peas on top. If the water rippled or the peas jumped, they knew the Ottomans were digging underneath them. They would dig counter-tunnels, meeting the Ottoman soldiers in the dark, narrow dirt passages. It was brutal, hand-to-hand combat in the pitch-black, miles underground. The starving city. By August, things were looking grim. Vienna was a city of ghosts. Food was running out. People were eating horses, then dogs, then cats. Disease was spreading like wildfire. The beautiful cathedrals were being chipped away by constant cannon fire. Count Starhemberg was wounded, but he refused to give up. He spent his nights on the highest tower of St. Stephen's Cathedral, looking at the horizon. He was looking for one thing: smoke signals. He was looking for any sign that an alliance of Christian kings was coming to save them. But Europe was divided. Many kings were too busy fighting each other to care about Vienna. It looked like the Golden Apple was finally going to fall. The king from the north. Just as the Ottomans were preparing their final, massive underground mine to blow the city's main defense apart, a shadow appeared on the hills of the Vienna woods. Enter King Jan Sobieski of Poland. He was a legendary warrior king, and he had answered the call of the Pope to save Christendom. He had marched his army of Poles, along with Germans and Austrians, who had finally joined forces across the mountains. On the morning of September 12th, the Ottomans looked up from their trenches. They saw the heights of the Kahlenberg mountain covered in soldiers. The relief army had arrived, but they were still outnumbered. Kara Mustafa was so confident in his victory that he didn't even stop the siege operations. He thought his rear guard could handle the newcomers while his main army finished off the city. He was wrong. The Winged Hussars. The battle raged all day. The infantry fought through the woods and the vineyards. It was messy and slow. But as the sun began to set, the world witnessed the most famous cavalry charge in history. Jan Sobieski led the charge himself. At the head of his army were the Winged Hussars. These were elite Polish heavy cavalry. They wore backplates with large wooden frames attached, decorated with eagle feathers. As they rode at full speed, the wind rushing through the feathers made a terrifying whistling sound. Imagine 18,000 horsemen, the largest cavalry charge in recorded history, thundering down a mountain toward your camp. The ground literally shook. The Hussars smashed into the Ottoman lines like a tidal wave of steel. The Ottoman army, which had been camped there for months, shattered. They panicked. Kara Mustafa tried to rally his men, but it was a total rout. They fled, leaving behind their tents, their gold, and their artillery. The aftermath and the legend. The siege was over. Vienna was saved. When Jan Sobieski entered the city, the people crawled out of their cellars to kiss his boots. He had done the impossible. This battle changed the world forever. It was the high water mark of the Ottoman Empire in Europe. From this day forward, the Ottomans would never again be a major threat to the heart of the continent. The map of Europe was redrawn. And here is a fun little bit of history for you. Legend says that after the siege, the bakers of Vienna created a new pastry shaped like the crescent on the Ottoman flag, so that the people could symbolically eat their enemies. That is one of the stories of how the croissant was born. They also found bags of strange green beans in the Ottoman camp. They didn't know what they were until a spy who had lived in the East showed them how to roast them. That was the birth of the famous Viennese coffee culture. Reflection. The Siege of Vienna is a reminder of how close the world came to being completely different. It was a story of desperate courage, of underground wars, and a legendary cavalry charge that arrived just in time. It reminds us that even when things look their darkest, a single moment of bravery can change the course of centuries. Thank you for joining us for this epic look at the stand that saved Europe. It is a story of blood, iron, and the will to survive against all odds. The Grand Vizier's gamble. Let's talk about the man who started it all, Kara Mustafa Pasha. He wasn't the Sultan, but he held the real power. He was the Grand Vizier, the right hand of the Ottoman ruler. Mustafa was a man of extreme ambition. He knew that the previous attempts to take Vienna had failed because of bad weather and poor timing. He wasn't going to make that mistake. He brought over 150,000 professional soldiers. But it wasn't just the numbers. He brought a city on wheels. He had 20,000 camels just to carry the coffee, the spices, and the luxury goods for his officers. He had a harem. He had gardens planted outside his tent. He expected a long, comfortable stay while he squeezed the life out of the city. Inside the city, the mood was the opposite. Emperor Leopold I had packed his bags and left. He didn't want to be there when the walls came down. He left the defense to Count von Starhemberg. Starhemberg was a man of iron. He ordered every house outside the city walls to be burned to the ground so the Ottomans wouldn't have any cover. He turned the beautiful suburbs of Vienna into a wasteland to save the core of the city. The Subterranean War, the Mine War. Most people think of medieval sieges as people throwing rocks from walls. But the Siege of Vienna was a high-tech war for its time. The most terrifying part wasn't happening in the air. It was happening under the ground. The Ottomans were the masters of siege engineering. They had specialized units called sappers. These men were like moles. They would dig deep, deep tunnels under the city's bastions. Once they reached the foundation of a wall, they would pack a giant chamber with thousands of pounds of high-quality black powder. Inside the city, silence was the enemy. The defenders lived in a state of constant paranoia. They used a genius trick. They would place a drum on the floor of a cellar and put dried peas on the drum skin. If the peas started to dance, it meant someone was digging directly underneath them. When a tunnel was detected, the Viennese would dig their own countermines. They would try to intercept the Ottoman tunnel. When the two tunnels met, a horrific battle would break out in a space no wider than a person's shoulders. Men fought with short swords, daggers, and even their bare hands in the suffocating darkness, miles beneath the surface, while the wooden supports groaned under the weight of the city above. The Janissaries, the elite strike force. If the sappers were the brains of the Ottoman army, the Janissaries were the iron fist. These were not your average soldiers. The Janissaries were an elite corps of infantry, recruited as children and trained for one thing and one thing only: war. They were famous for their massive mustaches and their tall white hats. They didn't use shields. They used long muskets and heavy scimitars. During the siege, they were the ones who volunteered for the suicide squads. These were groups of soldiers who would rush into the breaches made by the mines. The Janissaries were fanatically loyal to the Sultan. To the people of Vienna, the sight of a Janissary charging through the smoke was the stuff of nightmares. They were the most disciplined force in the world at that time. They could fire and reload their muskets with a speed that made the European defenders look like amateurs.